Welcome, everyone, to Christian Fiction Fans. We are here with Donna Mumma, and let me tell you a little bit about her. Donna is an award-winning author who grew up on a dairy farm in Florida. Before she started writing, she earned her degree in teaching and honed her storytelling skills as a first grade teacher, working to keep antsy 6-year-olds enthralled. That's a tough job. She loves to blend history, mystery, and faith in her novels. She loves encouraging fellow writers and serves as a chapter mentor for Word Weavers International. And she now lives on the Sunshine State's West Coast, sharing life with her family and her energetic colleague, Duke. So, welcome, Donna.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We're so glad to have you. I wonder, would you just start by telling us what your journey was to become an author? Because clearly you had this whole other career before you became an author. So, what was that journey like for you?
Um, I retired from teaching when we were ready to start our family. And so our kids were probably 2 and 4. And I was kind of at that point where I was needing something adult to do with my brain.
Yeah.
You can only watch so much Sesame Street and such, and you start losing brain cells. So I was talking to my husband about I said, I have these ideas for these stories. And I had played around with writing actually before we had the kids when I was still teaching. And so I was using his computer while he was at work, his home computer, and technology and I do not mix well. And his computer kept dying on me. So one day he brought home a computer for me and said, "Here you go, make it happen." So I wrote a book without knowing any idea how to write. I just sat down and wrote and tried to send it out to agents and such. And of course, got nothing because the book was in terrible shape. It was terrible. And so I happened to see that some agents would only talk to you if they met you at a conference. So I mentioned this to my husband. I said, "Oh yeah, it's just because I'm a little bit more of a homebody." And so
Yeah.
I said, "Yeah, I think we'll just shelve this for now because when am I ever going to get a chance to go to a conference because our kids were young and such." And so he said, "Well, let's see if there's one in Florida." And so he got on the computer and was looking and said, "Well, there's one over here. It's this place called Lake Yale. He said you could go to that one." And I took a pause because I said, "Well, that's where I used to go to church camp when I was a kid. I know exactly where Lake Yale is. It's about 30 minutes away from where I grew up." So I went to the conference and signed up for a class and realized how much about writing I did not know. And that's kind of where I got my start. I met the people who could help me get the book into shape and learn the business and learn the craft of writing. And I joined Word Weavers, and we are an organization of Christian writers. If you don't know about it, and we meet once a month, and we meet for critique. And we are all about encouraging and helping one another polish our work and get the message out there for the Lord. So through all of that and through some connections that I made at the conference, I learned how to write. And that first book never got published. I did pitch it a few times, but it never quite made it. But the next book that I wrote was the first one that I got published. And the editor who picked it up was actually someone that I had met that very first time when I went to that conference. So, it all fell into place for me, but it was probably, my goodness, it took me probably 10 years total from the time I started to get that first book written. And then the one that I actually got published as my first publication, it took another 5 or 6. I kind of lost count of how long it took because in the midst of that, I was raising a family. I was homeschooling kids, just being a wife, a mom, and doing those things.
Well, it's a lot of years, as you said,
It
and you're
was,
doing a lot of other things. So
yeah.
how during that time do you keep yourself focused and keep yourself coming back to, I got the story, I got to finish it without getting
Yeah.
distracted and pulled away?
There was, well, one reason it took so long is there were a lot of pauses in there because
Sure.
life happened. You know,
Yeah.
I had one of my parents passed away, and then, you know, your kids are growing up, your kids do things, and life just gets busy. And so, what finally made me get more on a path and a more solid path was when I joined Word Weavers because I was going once a month, and so that made me accountable. And then as
Yeah.
I started learning more about the business and understanding what I needed to do with publishing, I also started realizing, okay, you know, if I want this to happen, I need to get going. So I did, and I honestly just tucked writing in where I could. I'm the worst person to ask about what's your daily writing routine because I don't have one. It's honestly, I tuck it in. If I've got 4 or 5 hours here or there, I'll sit down and do it. And some days I write in the morning, some days I write in the afternoon, some days I will pick like a Saturday and just write all day if I can. And that's kind of what I do.
Yeah. Well, clearly it's in your heart. You have a desire to write because it keeps pulling you back even without a specific
It does.
routine.
It
Um,
does.
so that first book, tell us a little bit about the one that got published.
It's titled Fresh Scars, and
Mhm.
it is kind of a mystery suspense. Um, Kind of, I think the new title for it would be considered domestic suspense. It's a family thing, and
Okay.
it's about forgiveness, and it's um, about two sisters who have been estranged for 15 years, and they grew up with a very abusive mother. And for certain circumstances, she is now forcing them to come home and clean out their childhood home. And they've had nothing to do with her or each other for these 15 years. And one of them has OCD and some other issues with that. So this coming back is a huge anxiety thing for her. And the other sister, she's become very successful. She's become very wealthy, and she wants nothing to do with this either. So it's basically about them coming back together. And as they clean out this house and discover some dark family secrets and other things that kind of give them some answers for things that happened in their childhood, they also end up kind of cleaning out each other and things that they've been holding on to that they thought they were over or
Yeah.
just kind of ignored, and come to a point where they can forgive each other and kind of forgive the past so that
Yeah.
they can move on.
Yeah. So, and then the next book is The Women of Wynton's, right? The one that
Yes.
we read. So this
Yes.
is that first book, it sounds like it's a contemporary, and now
It
you
is a
take
contemporary.
this
Yes.
step
Yes.
back into the 1950s. Tell us about the inspiration to make that shift from contemporary to 1950s.
I swore I would never write a historical because you have to do so much research. And I know that people who read historical novels, they're very much into, you know, they want the facts right.
Yes.
And I just felt like, oh, I couldn't do that, even though I minored in history in college. It's kind of pathetic. But the idea actually came to me. I was walking into a dressing room in Steinmart that we had here in St. Petersburg, and there was this picture hanging on the wall that just made me stop in my tracks. It was these two beautiful women dressed in these dresses from the 1950s. And it just was so stunning to me, the colors and just the expressions on their faces and everything. And I immediately, the writer's brain starts going, gosh, who are they? And what, you know, I start thinking about who are they? What was their life like? And that then led into thinking about, gosh, I could write about four women. And why not be in a department store? Because then they would have all the beautiful clothes and I could write about the clothes. And so it came from that. And just, I started researching. It came from actually a rejection. I was hoping to write a sequel to my first book, and it did not sell well enough. And my publisher at that time was not interested. And I happened to be at a conference, and my agent was there, and she said, well, how'd the meeting go? And I said, well, they said no. And she said immediately, well, what's your next idea? Because she's very much one of, we don't dwell on the
Yeah.
rejections, let's move forward. And I said, well, I kind of got this idea about these four women that work in a 1950s department store. And I would, I said, I'd kind of look at, what women were going through at that time period, because the 50s were, here in the South at least, winds of change were starting to blow a little bit, and the beginnings of the civil rights movement was starting, those building blocks were starting to be set down. And I said, just kind of explore all of that and then just, learn about the department store. She said, I love that, do that. And you could make it a series. So that's where it came from.
So interesting. So there's a second book now, right?
Yes,
In this series. Um,
I have it right here.
okay, let's see it. First comes marriage,
First
then
comes
comes
marriage,
murder.
then comes murder.
All right.
And
And then how many books are planned for this series?
the third book is coming out October 1st of this year, and I just signed the contract for the fourth book. I'm doing one
Yay.
book per lady. So the second one focuses on Miss Vivian, and someone is killing her brides. So the ladies team up together to find out who it is. And the third one that's coming out in October is called Dressed for Success, Turned Out for Murder. And that one focuses on Mary Jo, and her husband has been arrested for murder. And he can't remember what happened. He has no memory of the event or what happened. And so she and the ladies team up together to find out what happened. And then the fourth one focuses around Gigi. And
Okay.
an old ex-husband shows up and starts causing mayhem.
Wow, I love it. So you made this transition and now you're diving all into the 1950s. And
Yeah.
as you mentioned, that takes a lot of research. So tell us a little bit about the research you did to figure out the 1950s, figure out department stores. What did you do?
Um, I went on Amazon and bought a lot of used books. I started out reading books about department stores because I was fascinated by that whole culture. And when I was growing up, I grew up in rural Florida and there was nothing there. We had to drive to go to a large department store. We had to drive 2 miles, 2 hours south to come to Tampa, or 2 miles east to go I'm sorry, 2 hours east to go to Altamont Springs, which is near Orlando. And so those were big trips. And I was always fascinated when we would go there because we would have Ma's brothers and Burdines and Robertsons and Jacobsons. And to me, they were just these huge, luxurious palaces with all, and we would go at Christmas time. So they're decorated just beautifully. And I was just fascinated, and I just thought, oh, that's such a cool place. And I loved going there to shop because it was so different than, we had a Sears and a Penny's, and they were very small, and they just didn't have that same sophistication.
Yeah.
So that played into that very much. So I started first reading books about department stores and learning the whole history of them and how they evolved in America, and was just amazed at what they offered because they were set up to be the one-stop shopping. So you could go and get your eyes checked and go see a doctor and go see a dentist, and they had florists and a beauty shop. And a lot of them specialized in having something special at their bakery. Like I know Ma's brothers had, I think it was some kind of special cinnamon cake or something, and Burdine's, theirs had, I think, a key lime pie. That's kind of Florida's special
Yeah.
dessert. And so it was just fascinating to me. And they did so many things in the communities where they were. I studied a lot about Rich's department store in Atlanta, and Macy's, of course, and Strawbridge, and can't remember the other, but several in Chicago. So that was fascinating just to learn about that, and how for women, especially, the department stores became a place where they could exercise some freedom that they didn't normally have outside because they could move up in the hierarchy in the bookkeeping or as a clothing buyer or something. So it opened up some avenues for women, which I had never really thought about. And actually, in the 1930s and 40s, Lord and Taylor was run by a woman, Dorothy Shaver, and she actually revolutionized some of the things that made the department stores great. She came up with ideas for having like a personal buyer, a clothing buyer for wealthier clients, and how they marketed goods and things. So it was just kind of fascinating to see that, wow, this actually was a place for women. So that, I could use that in the books as well. And then I started I had joined some Facebook groups that focused on fashions of the 50s and would print out pictures from that and actually had some conversations with some people in the group that were experts about, what they wore and all of that. And when I'm Pinterest and print it out, I generally take notes in a spiral notebook. And then I also print out a lot of pictures and put those in a 3-ring binder. And I just go back and forth to that. Anything I can think of that might be something that I could bring in that makes it more realistic, that goes in there somewhere. And so I have four huge notebooks and 4 spiral notebooks and a huge basket full of just research books that I've read. And I read biographies. And then also I leaned into a lot of memories of things that my mom told me, because my mother and dad, they married in 1950. And so my mom was the age of these ladies when she was younger. And so I remember stories from that. And I have 4 older brothers, and I'm being the only girl and the youngest. My mom, when I was old enough, she was taking me to all the Tupperware parties and all the baby showers and all the bridal showers because she wanted a buddy to go with, and she wanted to make sure that I was feminine and not just a little tomboy, because I was on a farm surrounded by all these boys and cows and dogs and pigs and everything else. So she wanted to make sure I had a feminine side in there. And so I remember sitting there and listening to conversations between her and her friends. And I didn't realize how much of that was showing up in the books until I wrote the second book. And all of a sudden, some of the things they were saying started clicking. I thought, oh, I know where that came from. So it was kind of a combination of all of that.
Yeah, wow. So, as you were talking about 1950s department store, and as I was reading the book, it made me think of the movie The Christmas Story, and how they center that Christmas stuff around going to see Santa and seeing
Yes.
the storefront windows all decorated. And I can remember as a child, my parents taking us to downtown to go see the Christmas windows. So that brings back memories for me. It wasn't the 1950s, but a similar vibe that we don't have anymore. You just don't see. As you were researching, was there a real life person that inspired Audrey, or was she just something completely made up?
The only inspiration I had for her was Audrey Hepburn,
Okay.
just because I love the classic movies from the 40s and 50s and early 60s. And the movie Funny Face was she's a model in that and such. I just always loved her because she was so sophisticated and different from the other really glamorous stars to me. She always carried just a different air about her. And so she was the physical inspiration for Audrey. That's why Audrey's named Audrey.
I love that.
As far as the other 4, they really not one specific person. I just kind of picked traits and things from women that I remembered growing up with that I thought would
Yeah.
fit. I mean, Miss Vivian is probably a combination of my own mother, how she kind of handled things, and some of her friends. And Mary Jo is based on kind of a combination of characters. I don't know. I watched the show Designing Women, And I always thought, the
Yep.
dynamics that they had of the four different women and how their personalities blended. I kind of tried to do something like that, where you have four very different people who come at life from a different point of view, but they
Yeah.
still mesh. So it's more of something like that.
Okay. I love that. That's great. Um, so truth is often stranger than fiction. Are there any things from maybe your real life or things you've observed in real life that inspired a scene or a moment from this story?
Oh goodness. Wow. Not anything that comes directly to mind other than, I mean, I can remember when I was younger and the department stores would have the Christmas and back to school fashion shows, kind of remember that. But um, what the book's fashion show is based on some um, films that I actually found of department store fashion shows from that time period. They're actually from Britain, but
Wow.
they kind of gave me the vibe, and I could kind of look at how they did it, how the women walked out, and kind of how it was structured and all of that. So as far as from my own life, not that I can think of. I mean, there's probably I've had friends say, "Oh, I can hear you," when this character said this
Uh,
line of dialogue, I hear you. But so it's in there probably, but I'm not catching it, I guess.
you don't even realize it. It's
No,
just so
no, I don't.
authentic to you. Yeah. Well, sometimes, usually, an author puts a piece of themselves into the characters. Are any of these characters, do they reflect you in any way?
Oh my. I would say probably Mary Jo and how she, had the feeling of the family and how she wants to um, be the mother hen of everybody. Because I'm definitely, our boys are adults now, but I was definitely that way when they were younger.
Yeah.
And wanting to be supportive of the husband. Um, I don't know. I mean, I will say some of the things that Mary Jo experienced with her husband being in Korea. My dad was in the Korean War, and I can remember my mom saying some things, and like Mary Jo's telling that her husband brought her china back from when he was in Korea. My dad did the same for my mother. He brought her back this beautiful set. I have it now of Noritake china, which here in the States at that time was very expensive. But my dad was in the Army, and they could purchase it in Japan and send it home, and it was much cheaper. So he bought her an entire set. She never saw it. He picked beautifully. It's gorgeous, and he sent that home. So I had that I guess so that would be one thing really from real life that was based on that. But as far as again, I've had friends say it, they see me in some of the characters, but I don't catch it. So it's there, I guess.
You're there, but yeah, we just have to dig deeper to catch on
It
to it.
wasn't on purpose, I guess. It just kind of
Right.
came through
Yeah.
somewhere.
Right, not intentionally. So tell us a little bit about how your faith influences your writing and your writing process, maybe your perseverance for all the years it took to get published.
Um, Definitely it's in there. When I write, my characters aren't they're real overt with it as some folks and some in Christian fiction are. And one reason I did that was because when I was growing up, I remember that people express their faith a lot differently than we do now. They were a little more, um, they lived it out rather than talked it out a lot. And I think some of that was just the culture at the time. And so you didn't have a lot of the outright things. There were some, but for the most part, they were more like they would say things like, "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry that's going on. I'll pray for you." And
Yeah.
that was their, they just kind of lived the faith out more. And so for these books, that's what I tried to do is just kind of have it woven in there where it felt naturally, because that was kind of how they did it. I
Yeah.
can remember folks, they would occasionally quote some Bible verses, but it was, it was kind of a simple application. And they just kind of built their, they all went to church. Everybody, I can
Yeah.
remember the majority of everybody, they went to church. And I grew up outside of a very small town, and that, it was still, there were at least 4 or 5 churches there. And everybody just kind of, you prayed before the meals and such, but it wasn't as open as we are now. And so that's what I kind of tried to reflect in here as, and I do try to have faith in there, and I do try to have it in just a natural way, so that hopefully folks who aren't Christians will pick up the books and enjoy them, and maybe get the lesson from there, and not feel like it's been shoved in their face, but just kind of
Right.
enjoy it and know it and understand it, that, it is a wonderful way to live, and these characters kind of reflect how that looks
Yeah.
in a natural way. And that's kind of what I like to go for.
Yeah, I love that too. And you're right. I think it was much more reserved probably in the 1950s
It was.
than the way we express it today. Um, yeah. How about, well, you talked a little bit about your writing process, that you don't really have one. But now that you're under contract for multiple books, you've got deadlines. So how long is it taking you to write a book and to draft that first draft?
Um, I generally, my deadlines give me about 8 months. And
Okay.
so I'm generally writing the books in 6 or 7 months. And I try to reserve those final weeks to do editing, because
Hmm.
my first drafts are an absolute mess. They truly, truly are. And I tend to be extremely wordy. So I'm always 20, 30, 40,000 words over my contracted word count. So I have to go through and just yank and yank and yank. And a lot of times I tend to try to have way too many plot lines going and such. And so I'll start an idea and then realize halfway through this wasn't going to work. So I just kind of abandon it. So then I have to kind of, make everything fit and tie up all the loose
Yeah.
ends. So I generally do that. And like I said, I fit it in wherever I can. The one thing that helps me the most is I have a small notebook, and I write down my word count where I'm starting. And I generally try to set a word count goal of at least 500 words. And if I hit the goal, great. Most of the time, I try to go over it. If I don't hit it, I just write down, at the end of the day, I write down what I finished. And tomorrow's another day, or the next writing is another day. And I will have days, usually on the weekends, where it's like a catch up day. And I will just, tell the family there's leftovers in the fridge, or you can order out. And I'm in the room, the door is shut. Please don't come through there. I'm working. And I just try to get down as much as I can. And on big days like that, I can generally get around 3,500 words, maybe 5,000
Wow.
if it's a really, really good day. But yeah, that's how I do it.
So you talked about having to pull things out because you put extra plot lines in, and there's this saying in writing about killing your darlings. Is there something that was in the original version of the Women of Wynton's that you had to pull out that maybe hurt a little bit? You didn't want to have to
Um,
do it.
there were some scenes that I had to tighten up, that I had some really great dialogue. There were some exchanges between Audrey and Junior that had to come out. And there were some things with Sissy, some situations where I was trying to show just how horrible she actually was, that I had to tighten up. The Tupperware party scene was actually much longer when I first wrote it. And as I was editing it, I came to realize it was just bloated and boring. So I went through and started yanking out some of these lines that I thought were just cute as could be, kind of things that Marette was saying about people who were there, and just kind of little side things that were kind of cute, but they just killed the pace of
Yeah.
that chapter. And so I took out a lot of that. And I'm trying to think. There were some others, but mainly it was just a lot of dialogue or some descriptions that just went on too long. I do know when I was trying to describe the showstopper, it had gone on way too long, and so I really cut that up and tried to make it a little less, because less is best. Even though some of because the dress that I had in mind, I had it was based on a um, picture from, I think it was Vogue or something, because I studied a ton of those when I was um, writing and trying to get the fashions and everything. And so I had gone into this extreme detail of this dress, and I thought, okay, nobody cares about all these tiny little details. Just get to the point. So there was a lot of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I also noticed that you have so many different designers and things like that listed. Are those made up designers or were they all real designers that you researched?
Everyone is real except Marion Leslie. She is made up. The one that
Okay.
they get the contract with, she is made up, but everyone else, Dior, James, all of those are real. And in all of the books, Marion Leslie is the only one who's made up. Everyone else is an actual designer from that time period who did have pieces in the department stores.
Love it. Love it. So, this book and the series being murder mysteries, are you always attracted to those kind of shows on TV? Do you read those kind of books? What made you want to write a murder
Um,
mystery?
Yeah, I mean, I loved Columbo. I loved, um, my dad loved the crime shows like Rockford Files and things like that. So I
Yeah.
grew up watching those. And there are a couple of movies that were made from Agatha Christie. There's one, it's Death on the Nile, as Peter Ustinov in it. It's an older one, and I have always thought that movie is so funny. And I just kind of like the unfolding of the mystery and trying to figure it out. I've had a few people tease me about, gosh, you're always killing somebody. I said, yeah, you're such a nice person. Why are you always killing people? And I said, well, it's the unfolding of the mystery that's fun for me.
And so approaching that from the other way around, as a reader, we're kind of picking up on clues, but you have to plant those clues and
Yes,
you have to plan that out. What is that process like? Like you have to know the end from the beginning, but you can't give away too much to start
yes,
with.
that is hard. And this was the first time I actually did something to that effect. Is the first book that I wrote. It was more of a like a treasure hunt kind of thing, and things are being revealed that way. And this being a true murder mystery, I had to, with each book, I've had to sit down and plot out, okay, what happened and who did it, and then think about, okay, what are the clues and how do the clues work, and then figure out how to set those up in the story. Because I did 10 in the first draft, and I have a writer friend who reads my stuff for me, and she's far better. I always tease her, she's the writer I want to be when I grew up. She's far better at writing than I am. She's very, very incredibly talented. And so I would send stuff to her. And in the first early chapters that I sent her, she said, okay, you're giving away way too much. Because, I'm already picking up on stuff that you don't want revealed until later. So I had to learn to back off and just kind of sprinkle them through more. And then kind of let it unfold that way. So I've gotten better at that. But the figuring out the clues to the murder and how to set those up has been probably the most tricky part of this.
Yeah, I can imagine. But you do know before you start writing the book who the guilty party is going to be. Because I've heard of
Yeah.
some authors who just, they kind of write and they figure it out as it's going too.
No, I can't do that. My brain is too scrambled to do that. I've got to have a plan. I've got to have a roadmap to get there. So
Yeah.
yes, I do know who did it. And I don't always know the clues or how I'm going to show those. Some of those reveal themselves as I'm going. I kind of have a basic idea, and I generally try to have at least two or three clues that lead up to that. And as I am writing, other little ideas to drop in will come to me and kind of set that up better.
Yeah.
Like in the Women of Wynton's, the comment that Mary Jo makes about perfume, that it lasts for a certain amount of time on a piece of paper, whatever. That was actually something I found out later on. I was already about halfway through the book, I think, and I happened to be reading about a certain type of perfume, and that fact came up in the article that I was reading, and I thought, oh my goodness, that would work so well. So I made a note, a little sticky note, and stuck it up on my desk, and thought, okay, I want to work that in, because I just thought, oh, that just works really great, and
Yeah.
I could put that right there. So
Yeah. Perfect. I love it. Well, I'd love to give everybody else a chance on the call right now. If anybody has questions or comments for Donna, feel free to write them in the chat or unmute yourself or raise your hand or whatever you want to do. Linda.
Hey, well, I grew up in the 50s, so these department store things, I was in Minneapolis and we had a couple of really nice
yes, we
stores
did.
downtown. So we used to take the streetcar or the
Oh
bus and
yeah,
go downtown, and sometimes we'd eat in the tea room if we had a special.
yes,
Otherwise, we always went shopping in the bargain basement.
yes, yes.
But
Yep.
some of the stuff that you mentioned there, brought back memories for me.
Oh, nice. That's what I wanted to do. I've had a lot of folks from that same as you say, make those comments. That I remember going with my mom, and we always dressed up, because you
Yep.
dressed up when you went downtown, and you dressed up to go to the department stores. And they remembered, and that was one thing that was so great with the books that I read. I could pull out those small little details like that would actually bring back the memories, like the spraying of the perfume in the cosmetics department. They did that. They still do that. And I remember one lady saying, I always remembered when you walked in, the department store always smelled so luxurious because it was the perfume, because they'd spray the perfume in the first floor. Because generally cosmetics was in the first floor, and usually somewhere in the center, because that was the one of the number one money making departments, and they wanted it front and center. So as soon as those ladies came in, they could entice them for something, And so she said, "Yeah, I remember that." So I love that it brought back memories for you on the streetcar. I'd never even thought about that, because we didn't have those here in Florida, but that's really neat. I love that.
Maybe there'll be a streetcar and another book you write. Gave you the idea.
Yeah, yeah, Florida. I don't know. Other than Disney, I don't. Oh well, now they did have some in Tampa. So if I wrote something about Tampa from that time period, I could probably get one in there.
Oh, no, write it down in your notebook. Now you've got another idea.
Yeah.
Jennifer, did you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, thank you. Now, I really enjoyed this because it did bring up a lot of my childhood. In Nashville, there was a department store, Kane Sloan, and there was Harvey's, and it was a big production, during all
Mhm.
the different seasons, holiday seasons. But um, I can remember right before Easter going and shopping for like patent leather shoes, or
Yes.
saddle locks or things like that. And, you know, my mom, she worked downtown, and when she went into work, they actually had an etiquette person there that would check the ladies for hose,
They did.
girdle,
They did.
gloves, everything, makeup, everything.
They did.
And so when we would go shopping, those were some of the things. I would always have a hat and gloves, nice
Hmm.
shoes when we go shopping. But I can remember Kane Sloan and Harvey's, I think, but they had like a talking Christmas tree that was like an attraction for the kids, or
Oh,
like,
neat.
yeah, they did. And then upstairs at Kane Sloan's was where they would do the fashion show, but they had a huge banquet hall, and you would go and you would
Yes.
have like tea, there,
Hmm.
or, like lunch, while you were there. So that was really, really neat. I liked the Miss Evelyn quotes because I was reading some of the reviews like on Goodreads, and some of the women were saying you could really tie some scripture into some of her little,
Yes,
etiquette, quotes. But and I can remember that they would have etiquette classes at some of these
Yeah.
they
as
did.
well. Yeah.
They did.
So, but anyways, it was nice to bring up memories with my mom. So she's gone. So it
Oh,
was nice
nice.
to revisit that. Thank
Thank you.
you.
I like hearing that. I do. I yeah, it that yeah, it was, and I those were things I didn't know about because I grew up in the country, so basically our etiquette came from our mothers. Because our Sears and Pennies didn't offer that. So we had the little old ladies in church and our mothers. But that was one thing that, especially in the South, the charm schools were during the summer when the kids were out, and that was a big thing, is that the mother sent their kids to whoever was teaching that there. And with Audrey and the whole thing with the charm school and everything, I wanted that to be so much a part of her character, because Audrey is, everything about her is so controlled, because unlike a lot of us, she's been taught at every stage how to behave. She went through charm school, and Miss Evelyn had, there was a saying for everything. There was something to do in every situation. And I can remember growing up, my mother's friends and my mother, there were like set rules of things you did and did not do. And the department stores were such this, they were the center of a community and wanted to do that. And so they were right there helping the mamas of the time set those rules. And I just thought, that was such an interesting dynamic to see that, we're all going to take them to the department store, and the department store's going to teach you how to act, and they're going to teach you how to dress, and they're going to, and brides could go there. I go over this in the second book. Brides could go there for cooking classes and decorating classes, and how to hostess, like being a hostess for a party or something, and all those proper things. And they just taught classes all the time. And then, use those to sell products, of course, like, the cookware, or, things, and they had, a lot of the department stores and their furniture departments, they had decorators that you could hire to come decorate your house and things like that. So it's like, the department store had such an influence over the area around them, and they set the trends. It was kind of a delicate balance that they set the trends, but they also had to watch the trends of what was going on, because where this Levy City is actually based on Leesburg, Florida, which to me, that was our big town to go to, which it really wasn't. But for us that lived way out in the country, Leesburg was the big sophisticated place to go. And so making that, such an influential part over that, and Levy City, based where it is, based on Leesburg, it's in the central part of the state. So at that time, around Leesburg, you had huge acres of orange groves, because that was kind of the center of the orange grove business in Florida. But you also had cattle ranchers, and then you had small farmers like my dad, and then you had the people who worked for them. So you had a very diverse group of people, because Leesburg itself had country clubs set and had people who were the owners of the larger businesses or the large farms or whatever. And then you had the different groups of people who worked for them and all that. So the department stores had to cater to all of that. And so as I was reading a lot of them, there were a couple in Alabama, in Birmingham. I have a very dear friend. She's from Birmingham. So she was giving me some memories of Parisian and Lovemans. And she was talking about how you'd have these gorgeous, gorgeous departments filled with all the beautiful fashions, but then tucked away, they'd have the coveralls that the gentlemen would wear, when they were farming, or the mechanics, or so she said they had to be conscious of everybody. They couldn't just cater to one thing, and they wanted to be open to everybody. So I thought that was an interesting dynamic that I wanted to try to make sure that I included that, yeah, it was this luxurious place, but it was also kind of, the Walmart of their day. So they had to be there for everybody.
Yeah, yeah, and I just keep thinking about Amazon as you're talking because Amazon's trying to be everything for everybody
Yes,
online, and that
yes,
is feels like is what the department stores were in person all those
yes,
years ago.
they
Yeah,
were. They were. Yes. And I mean, I've had some people ask me, could they really order an artificial limb? I said, yes, they did.
wow.
Because you think about it, the folks who were living out, especially like in Florida, because in the 1950s, there were parts of Florida that were settled, and then there were parts of Florida that were wild. They were very wild, and the wild wasn't that far out from where the settled part was, really. And
Yeah,
so, these folks didn't have access to like Amazon or something like that, or a doctor's office or a hospital that could bring that to them. Because like I was born in a Leesburg in a hospital in Leesburg, and it was tiny. It was 2 stories and it was tiny. And if you had a really serious problem, you had to go to Tampa or because Orlando wasn't that big either. It didn't really start getting that big until the 70s. But yeah, Tampa was kind of our big destination when I was growing up. And so the department stores filled that thing. They had access to those suppliers. So you would get your prescription from your doctor, or your doctor would just order it for you from the department store. And all kinds of, I mean, I was very surprised because pretty much whatever you could get mail order, you could go to the department store and they would get it for you. And then they would, and then they get it shipped to you and whatnot. So that it was just fascinating to me that they did that.
yeah, definitely. Pam, did you have a question or comment?
Yes, I also went back in time as well. I was born in 1950, lived in Northern Illinois. Um, Wisey's Charm School, I went to that. Uh, we also would occasionally go to Chicago, to Marshall Fields, and
Yes.
to
Yes.
Milwaukee, and I was too young to remember what that store was, but I remembered being very impressed. Then married in 71, came to Minneapolis, and we had Dayton's, which was
Yes.
also one of that class.
Yes.
And I remember their cafeteria much like Linda did, and their popovers. That was their big deal.
Yes.
No matter
I
what
remember that.
you got a popover.
Yes.
That was
Yeah.
nice.
Yes. And that was such a neat thing I thought when I was doing the research, that there were things that, like you said, if you came into town, you had to get one from there. Because I remember when we would go to Sears, my dad always wanted to get Sears had the warmed up cashews, and they put them in a little white paper bag with the pink stripes. And if when and he wasn't much of one to go shopping, so if my mother could get him out of the house to go to Sears, she was definitely going to get him a bag of cashews. Just so he would maybe come back with her another time. But yeah, and I remember, there were, and I can remember the smell when you would walk in. You could smell those that they'd have that. You could smell the popcorn and the cashews because they'd have like a little cart kind of in the middle of the store with the little like a striped awning on it. And you could get the warmed over cashews. I think they had almonds and popcorn, and I'm sure they had pecans too. And I remember that, and I was writing, it's like, yeah, all those things, and it was all part of the experience. It wasn't by accident. They marketed that on purpose. That when you went, there were the smells and the sights and the sounds. One interesting thing I found that I thought was just so perfect. The type of music that they played throughout the day changed. In the mornings, they would play kind of quiet music because everybody's kind of getting used to the day, and it was a little more soft and quiet. And then from about noon to 4, they'd play much more lively music, kind of get everybody, oh, they're in here and everybody's bustling and let's get going and selling. And then for the final hours of the day, they would go back to something a little more quiet and serene to basically soothe the shoppers who might have been working all day and they came to the store and they're exhausted, but they want them to feel welcome and calm and happy. So they'll buy more. So they play, and I just thought that was amazing. Just, and they pipe it through, and it was a planned out, kind of a planned playlist of what they were going to do. And they had a specific time when they would start playing the Christmas carols, and they'd have a specific time when they would play other things. They rarely played the music with lyrics because they didn't want people focusing on thinking about the words. They wanted the music to just kind of play in the background and entice people to buy more.
First day. Yeah. Yeah. I worked at Sears for a little while too, and I made the popcorn and I made
Oh,
popcorn and roasted the nuts. Yep.
oh, wow. Yes. Yes,
My
my dad would have loved you.
my question for you is with your series of books, are they written as standalones or strictly as a series?
They are a little bit of both. What I'm trying to do with each book is I don't want to write the same story twice.
Mhm.
So, like the first book is very much just an introduction to the store and the four characters, and kind of give everybody an idea of who's who and kind of the history behind it, and just kind of pull you into the world. The second book focuses on the business of marriage. And in the 1950s, it had very much become a business. The bridal consultants worked with jewelers and florists and caterers, and they had books that they gave out. The bridal salons had these very nice books that helped you plan everything from engagement to your honeymoon to setting up your house. And it was very much a business. So I focus on that a lot, and kind of bring in a little bit of some things from Mary Jo's life and some things. Audrey is in a different job in the second book. She gets a promotion. And so this opens up a different world. She is a clothing buyer. So she's going to New York City, and she visits, I kind of went for some things that were kind of big spots in New York City at the time. She goes to the automat and gets a meal there, and kind of do that, and experiences the bitter cold because she's there in the wintertime. And so I bring in some other things there. And then the third book, I kind of leaned into kind of Florida's seedier side at the time. I go into some bootlegging and moonshining and some gambling and things that were going on at the time that was kind of running rampant, and explore. There were actual gangsters here. There was some in Tampa. One of the worst ever, his name was Santo Trafficante Jr. And I know when we first moved down to Tampa, we were hearing some things about, because one of like his final henchmen had passed away shortly after we got married, and there was a big thing in the newspaper about all of his nefarious deeds. But as I was doing research into just the criminals of that time period, I found out, lo and behold, that the gangsters down here in Tampa were actually teaming up with something that was called the Redneck Mafia, which was a bunch of Southern men who were into all kinds of terrible things. They were doing gambling and making booze and such. And so they would kind of team up and do things, and kind of running all these rackets all over the state. And because Florida was so wild at the time, they could hide out in the swamp, they could hide out in the woods, and were hard to catch. And by the time the law found where they were, they'd already picked up and moved somewhere else. And Trafficante actually had ties to Cuba. So if things got too hot here for him, he was just shipping stuff over to Cuba, storing it over there, and then shipping it back, because the coastline at that time, Florida was not as able to watch the coastline. So, they're in and out. So it was kind of exciting to do that. So I wove some of that into the story. The ladies do get kind of mixed up with some of that, trying to find the clues and things. And so I did that. And then the fourth book is kind of, I'm bringing it back kind of to a little bit of a smaller story, kind of back to because this is the last one in the series. And so I'm kind of bringing it back to the store, but also focusing on the fact that this last book is now set in 1958 and a lot of change is on the horizon. And so I'm working to set up all those little things that were starting to happen with the African American community as they're starting to now work for their civil rights and fight for their civil rights. And also in 1958, again, things were changing for women. The era of the housewife was kind of starting to change, and women who had enjoyed freedoms in the 1940s and had kept jobs and things in the 1950s, they were starting to think about, what's going on there too. And Florida itself was changing, and there was a lot of land fraud. And basically, here I've got some beautiful swampland. I'll sell you $10 down, $10 a month. And, they were selling plots of land 3, 4, 5 times. And people were coming down here with a deed to a piece of property that had more alligators and mosquitoes than people. And so I'm kind of weaving that in there as well, because that was part of Florida history. And so in each book, I've tried to pick something that was a part of Florida's history at that time that may not be as well known. I've purposely stayed away from the beaches in Miami and the glamour and the glitz of all of that, because everybody knows that. I kind of wanted to focus on, Central Florida at that time was very different than Miami. And a lot was going on there that, Florida still gets a lot of reputation for. We had Florida Man back then, and we still have Florida Man now. And so I'm trying to kind of show, what Florida was like at that time period, because there was a lot of change and a lot of just people coming in that were not used to Florida. So I'm trying to kind of work around all of that and just work that into the story.
Well, thank you for your glimpse of the subsequent books. How are they being published? Is it electronic, print, and audio?
All three. They come out in print. They are you can get them on Kindle or all of the ebooks, and then also audiobooks. The audiobooks tend to come out a little bit later than the Kindle version and the print version. But I do know that the second one and the third one have been contracted for that, and I'm under the understanding that the fourth one will also come out on audiobook.
That's great. Thank you.
So the audiobooks, do you get any say in who does the actors that do the audiobook?
No.
No. Okay.
I don't, but I have been told that the person that they've had read, they've had the same lady read the first one and the second one, that she is amazing. I've not heard them yet, but I've heard that she is amazing. And people have said they actually read the book and then listened to her on audiobook and loved both. It was like a new book almost, because she does such a great job.
Yeah, well, I actually, at the beginning of this year, I'm very much not an audiobook person. I'm usually reading on my Kindle most often. And so one of my reading goals for 2026 was to listen to an audiobook. And yours was the first one I did back in January.
Awesome.
And it was very, very well done. Yeah, I loved listening to that actor. She did such a great job with the voices and the expression, and it was really well done. Did anybody else listen to the audiobook, or did we all just read it? All right. Well, if you're in the mood for an audiobook, even though you've already read it, you might go back and or listen to book 2 if it's the same same actor. But it was very well done. I really enjoyed that. And I think I only listened to one other audiobook this year, because I'm just I don't know, I just like reading. So
I do too.
Jennifer.
I was going to say, sometimes my brain, I can't concentrate sometimes. So I'll do immersive reading. So we'll read the book and listen to the audio. And there are so many talented people, narrators out there that do these audiobooks. And it's just, it really brings the book out. I mean, you just feel like you're a part of it. So, but anyways, that's just what I do sometimes.
Double
That sounds
duty.
great. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very
I
good.
like I like that they are on audiobook because there are folks, that reading is too difficult for them now for a variety of reasons. And so they can still listen to the book, and like you said, it comes alive and they can enjoy it. And I've had folks multiple times emailing me, I want your book, but I want it on audiobook. When is it coming out? I've had to say, well, I don't really know. I don't control that. My publisher, just keep an eye on Amazon or whatever, they get them out as fast as they can. So, but yeah, I don't have any say over that. I do um, give ideas for the book covers. I do have some say in that. And they'll ask me for pictures, or, how would you like this represented, or whatever. And I've been so thrilled every single time they've knocked it out of the park. They've absolutely just captured the book perfectly with the covers. And they all, when you put them together, they look good together. They look like they fit together, and the colors that they've used are all 1950s shades. And I'll send them probably far more than they need. I send them just pages and pages and pages of pictures of fashions and department store interiors or whatever we can think of. And they've just done an amazing job with cover art.
That's neat. Well, it's time for us to wrap up. But before we go, we would love to know how we can connect with you. Where's the best place online to stay connected?
I'm on Facebook, Donna Mumma, or I have an author page, Donna, I think it's Donna Mumma / writer. But you can find me on both of those. I'm also on Instagram. I generally spend most of my time on Facebook. I'm posting there, and I post while I'm writing, not as often, but when I'm got a new book or something coming in, I'm posting about 2 or 3 times a week about the books, or posting things that kind of give people an idea of the book. I post a lot of stuff from the 1950s, vintage toys, clothes, funny things that I find, or something like that, just to kind of keep everybody. But yeah, Facebook is generally my biggest hangout. I'm not a huge social media person. I can't figure out how to do a lot of them. So Facebook I've figured that one out, in Instagram.
Right. Well, we will include links to those for everybody. So if they want to connect with you further, they can. And then we'll be watching for October 1st for the next
Yeah.
book to come out. And I'll make sure to include that in our newsletter as well, so
Thank
people know when
you.
it comes out. Well, we would just want
Appreciate
to
that.
thank you, Donna, for being here. This has been fascinating. I've learned so much about the 1950s and about department stores that I never knew. You clearly have done your research, and thank you for spending your evening with us and sharing your beautiful stories.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun. I appreciate it.